Now let's quickly go to the Visual Studio Code and let's see how we can create our first namespace and how we can put some identifiers in it and how those identifiers will get a scope of a namespace. So let's quickly jump on to the Visual Studio Code. All right. Okay, so now we are on the Visual Studio Code. Okay, let's quickly so I have created one file, that is namespace.cpp. So we'll write our entire code in this file. Okay, so let me quickly write some basic code. So let's quickly add one header file over here. So let me add hash include iostream. So today or this video is going to be day where you will understand the exact meaning of the syntax, that is using namespace std. Okay, so you will understand the exact meaning behind this syntax. What does this mean? That is using namespace std. So you will get that today, okay, in this today's video. Cool. Then let me just write main function. So let's say int main. Okay. Okay, now let's quickly see how we can create a namespace. Okay, so at first we will see how we can create a namespace, the syntax for creating a namespace. So let me write it in comment. So we are going to see how we can create a namespace. So the syntax of creating namespace is very easy. What you have to do is you just have to write namespace keyword followed by namespace followed by name of the namespace. Okay, so let's say I want to name my namespace as, let's say, sector 1. Okay, so let's say I want to create my namespace with name sector 1. That's it. You just have to write namespace keyword followed by name of your namespace. Obviously in your programming or while we write a program, sector 1 doesn't make any sense, right? This is just an example. So just to relate this example with the real life example that we have seen. Okay, so don't take it seriously. When you will write your code, just try to give it some logical name. Okay, so we'll see, okay, what can be some logical name to the namespace. Okay, so we'll see that. Okay, so this is basic syntax of creating a namespace. Now once we create a namespace, what it going to happen is namespace will give us, or it will create a scope. Okay, it is going to create a different scope. Whatever identifier we declare inside that namespace will have a scope of that namespace. Okay, so let's quickly see. Let's say I want to declare one variable, let's say of integer type. So let me write int a. Okay, I am declaring it inside the namespace. Just observe what we are doing. Let's say I want to declare some function. Let's say function, let's say int foo, or let's say void foo. Okay, so I'm declaring one variable with name a, let's say int a, and let me also initialize it. So let me write int a is equal to 10. And also I'm declaring one function inside the namespace. Now in main function, if I go to the main function and if I try to access a, okay, let's try to access a by writing cout statement. So let me write cout a is equal to, let's say, value of a I want to print. You can see the editor has started giving an error. Okay, so what editor is saying? Editor is saying identifier a is undefined. Okay, so now a is not getting accessed, or a cannot be seen inside the main function. The reason is a is declared inside the namespace and namespace is creating a different scope. Okay, so this is the reason why a is not accessible over here. Okay, so we have seen how we can create a namespace. We have seen how we can put some identifier or declare some identifier inside the namespace. Now what we are going to see next is we are going to see how we can access the members of the namespace, or how we can access the identifier which we are declaring inside the namespace. So let's quickly see how we can access the identifiers which we are declaring inside the namespace. Okay, so there are actually 3 ways by which we can access the identifiers which are declared inside the namespace. So we are going to see them one by one. So let's start with the first way. Okay, let me just write it over here. So way 1 is using, or by making use of using directive. Okay, so what we can do is there is a special syntax in C++ that is using directive. By making use of this using directive, we can ask the C++ compiler to get the access of the variable which are declared or which are present inside the namespace. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. So the syntax is very simple. You have to write using followed by namespace followed by name of the namespace. So in this case, the name of the namespace is sector1. Very easy. See what we have to do. We have to write using namespace followed by name of the namespace. Okay, so here in this case, name of the namespace is sector1. So what we are writing? We are writing using namespace sector1. Once we write this statement, obviously you have to terminate it with the semicolon. Once we write this statement, you can see that the error has gone. The error that editor was showing has gone. That means we are now able to access a variable which is declared inside sector1 namespace. Let's verify this by compiling this file and by executing this file. If we are able to get access to a, that means the compiler should not throw any error, and when I will run this code, the compiler should print 10 on the screen. So let's quickly verify this. So let me just open the terminal. Let's clear the terminal. Okay, now let's quickly compile this code. So let's write G++ followed by name of the file, that is namespace.cpp. Okay, the file is getting compiled. We'll have to wait for some time. Why it is taking so much time? Okay, now the file has got compiled. That means the compiler has no issue with the syntax that we have written. That means the syntax is absolutely fine. Okay, so if you will now execute this code, you can see that we are getting output as 10. So now what this using directive is doing, or what this using statement is doing, the using statement will bring in all the variables, all the identifiers which are present inside the namespace into the scope in which you are writing this statement. Let me quickly repeat that line again. Okay, it's a little bit heavy, I know. So whenever you write using directive, what this using directive is going to do, it is going to bring in all the variables which are declared in the namespace in the scope in which you are writing that using directive line or using directive statement. So in this case, what is happening? We are writing using namespace sector1 inside the main function. So what compiler is going to do? Compiler is going to bring in all these variables in the scope of main function. Okay, so as all these variables are coming in the scope of main function, what does that exactly mean? That means these variables can now be accessed inside the main function. Okay, let's say let me just tell you by giving one more example. Let's say we have another function that is, let's say, bar. Okay, and let's say I try to access a variable inside the bar function, and let's say I'm calling bar function from main, and let's quickly compile the code. You can see that we are getting an error over here, that is a is not declared in the scope. Why it is giving an error? Because we have only brought namespace sector1 in the scope of main. So sector1 variables or identifiers are still not present in the scope of function bar. Okay, so if you want to bring variables or identifiers of the sector1 namespace in the scope of bar function, then in that case what you will have to do? You will have to just put this line in the bar function. That's it. So if you will put this line in the bar function, now the sector1 scope or the bar function will also have access to the variables which are declared in sector1 namespace. Okay, and now if I will compile this code, let me just clear the terminal quickly. If I now compile this code, you can see that the code is getting compiled, and now if I run this code, you can see that we are getting output as a equal to 10, a equal to 10. Very easy. So what we are doing, whenever we are declaring any namespace, whenever we have to bring in the variables which are declared inside that particular namespace, we are going to make use of using directive. So what is the syntax? We have to write using namespace followed by name of the namespace, and then whatever variables are declared inside that namespace will be available in the scope in which you are writing that line or you are writing this statement. Okay, now let's say you have two functions, main and bar, and both of them want to access or wants access of the variables which are declared inside namespace sector 1. In that case, what you can do, instead of writing this line repetitively 2 times in the 2 different function, what you can do is you can write this line globally. Okay, so what I'm doing, I'm writing this line globally. Okay, so let me just remove it from here as well. So I'll just comment this over here. Okay, now you can see I'm not writing this line inside any of the function, I'm writing it globally. So now what will happen? The compiler will pull in the variables which are declared inside the namespace sector 1 into the global scope, because we are writing this line in global scope. So now these variables will be kind of a global variable, okay, and any function can now access them. So now, just to show you, if I compile this code, okay, and if I will quickly execute it, you will see that we are getting the same output. Now I guess you must have got hint of what this statement basically does. Okay, this is very similar statement that we are writing over here. We are writing using namespace, that is same using directive, and name of the namespace is std. So what this statement is doing, this statement is pulling in all the variables, all the identifiers which are declared inside standard namespace into our global scope. Okay, so what are the variables which are declared inside standard namespace? So the variables like cout, cin, okay, these variables which we use for doing input output operation are basically or by default declared inside standard namespace. Now one important line, just hear it very nicely, okay, just take it very nicely. One important line about the standard namespace is whatever C++ libraries you use in your program, it can be any library. Let's say IOStream, then you can have string library, you can have math library, any library in C++. All the constant, all the variable, all the identifier which are declared in those library will lie in standard namespace. Okay, so whenever you declare or whenever you use any C++ library, all the variables, all the identifiers of those libraries will be by default declared inside standard namespace, and that's the reason whenever you use any header file, you will compulsory have to access these variables from the header files or the identifiers from the header files from the standard namespace, because by default all of them lies in standard namespace or std namespace. Okay, now I'm going to quickly tell you one important thing, or okay, I will tell you that thing later. Right now let's see what is the second way of accessing the variable or getting access to the variable which are declared inside the namespace. So let's quickly see that. Okay, so we have seen the first way by writing using namespace followed by sector 1 or name of the namespace. Let's see the second way. Okay, so the second way is very simple. What you have to do is you have to write name of the namespace, okay, like this, followed by scope resolution operator, followed by name of the identifier. Very easy. You have to write name of the namespace followed by scope resolution operator followed by name of the variable, okay, or name of the identifier. So in this case, name of my namespace is sector 1 and I want to access, let's say, a variable from sector 1. So how I will access it? I will write sector 1 scope resolution a or sector 1 colon a. So this colon is called as scope resolution operator in C++. Okay, so you have to write name of the namespace followed by scope resolution followed by name of the variable. So you can do the same thing over here as well. So you can write sector 1 scope resolution a. Okay, you can do same thing over here as well. So if you don't want to write this line, what you can do is instead of writing cout, you can write std colon cout. Similarly, this endl is also a variable declared inside standard namespace. So you will have to write std colon endl, okay, and that will work. Similarly over here, so let me just copy paste this thing. This syntax looks little bit weird, that's why programmers don't like it. Okay, so usually programmers use using directive. All right, very easy. I hope you have got the setting syntax. We have to write name of the namespace scope resolution operator, which is denoted by colon symbol, followed by name of the identifier or name of the variable or anything. Okay, cool. Let's move to the third syntax. Okay, third syntax is very similar to the using directive, but now what we can do, By writing using directive, what basically happens is whatever identifiers are declared in that namespace, all the identifier will be or will come in the scope in which you are writing that using directive. But sometimes what happens is we don't need all the identifiers from the namespace in our scope. We just need, let's say, 2-3 identifiers from them, or we just need only one identifier from the namespace in our scope. So in that case, or in such case where you want only single identifier from the namespace, or you want only, let's say, 2 identifiers from the namespace in your scope, you can use this third syntax. So what you have to do is you have to write using keyword followed by name of the namespace. So name of the namespace is, let's say, sector1, followed by scope resolution operator, followed by name of the identifier which you want to bring in into the scope. Okay, so in this case, let's say I want to bring in A into my scope, so I will write using sector1 scope resolution A. Okay, let's say you have some another variable with name, let's say B, and you want to bring in B into the scope as well. Then in that case, you will have to write using sector1 scope resolution, let's say B. Okay, so by this syntax, what you can do is you can bring in specific variables or identifiers in the scope. By writing using namespace followed by name of the namespace, all the identifiers are by default coming into the scope. But if we don't want that, if we want specific identifiers into the scope, then in that case we can make use of this syntax. Okay, so now you don't need to write this. If you write, that's fine. I mean, you can always write name of the namespace, scope resolution, name of the identifier. That you can do always. But if you are writing it over here using followed by name of the namespace, scope resolution, name of the identifier, then you don't need to write name of the namespace, scope resolution, name of the variable or identifier. Okay, same goes with here. And let's say I want to now print, let's say, B as well. We can do that. Okay, because now we also brought B into the scope. So let's quickly compile the code. Let's quickly execute it. You can see that we are getting output as 10 followed by 20 followed by 10. Okay, so A and B are getting printed, then we are calling bar, and in bar also A is getting printed. So all these functions are able to access A and B, which are declared inside sector1 namespace. Okay,